the very first panel discussion of the program and of the event happening right now. And we're essentially going to set the scene of what we mean when we are talking about the skills revolution and the level of readiness for it. So I read such a wonderful comment about the skills revolution. And it was a likening to how individuals would prepare when they know that a hurricane is coming. I come from a part of the world I don't think I've experienced. In fact, I haven't experienced a hurricane before, but I know that in other parts of the world, when there is a notification from the weather service to say that this adverse weather event, this hurricane is happening, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. So individuals, what I've seen, particularly on the movies that I've watched, individuals will make sure that their windows are insulated, the doors are insulated, they've got sufficient blankets, they've got sufficient food, probably for the shed in which they will be staying in while the hurricane is ongoing. They're adequately prepared. What is also notable, and what I've also seen, is that in the event where that strong weather event is happening, there's a certain level of community spirit that is involved as well. There's a level of making sure that the rest of the community, your neighbor, knows what is happening, that the elderly in the community and the kids in the community are also well prepared and protected, so that when that hurricane eventually does come, although it will cause destruction, that's a fact, because of the level of preparedness that has gone in anticipating it, the level of damage and destruction is limited. And what that also means is that once the wind eventually blows over, the repair work of the homes and all the damage that resulted as a result of the hurricane is limited because of preparedness. And why I use the analogy of a hurricane is because there's a force, a really strong force, being driven by technology, being driven by climate, being driven by economic shocks, like the COVID-19 pandemic, and even to a very large extent, the war that we're currently seeing in the Ukraine. There's a force that's coming that is going to revolutionize the labor market. It's already underway, as we heard from the head of the World Skills Organization, and it's an unstoppable one that is going to overthrow the current system, the current status quo. So the question is, what kind of tools do we need to make sure that when the force does come and the wind eventually blows over, that the level of damage that it does cause is limited as much as possible, such that the displacement that is caused to some individuals who may lose their job as a result of this revolution, as a result of this force, is limited to such a way that their repositioning in the new world, whatever the new labor market looks like, is easier to do. And so I'm looking forward to your insights on what you think some of these tools that we can sharpen are right now, particularly for those of you who responded quite confidently in the poll, saying that you had anticipated the revolution. There is a level of preparedness that you do have going underway, and that you feel that you will be well insulated to the change, from the change that the revolution does bring. And I hope that you'll share those tools with us on the comment section in the chat, as you have been doing, and also pose any questions to the speakers, whom I'm about to introduce you to right now, beginning with Mr. Bernardo Calzadilla-Sarmiento, who is the Director of the Division of Fair Production, Sustainability Standards and Trade at UNIDO. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Wonderful. We also have Antonio Andreoni. He is the Professor of Development and Economics at SOAS, University of London. Hi, Antonio.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Wonderful. Luca, also with us, Marcolin, economist at the OECD Directorate for Employment, Labor and Social Affairs. Hi to you, Luca.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Great to be with you. We have Francesca Rosso, the Human Capital Development Expert, a coordinator for a skills demand analysis at the European Training Foundation.
Good morning, everybody.
Wonderful. We also have Kirsten Schuettler, project lead of the German Federal Enterprise, the GIZ. How's it, we say in my part of the world, Kirsten?
Everything great. Thanks so much. And good morning to everyone. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Ulrika Hessling, Sjöström, She is the Senior Program Manager at CEDA. Hi, Ulrika.
Hi, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yes. So we have quite a big panel weighing in on quite a big topic. And so, Bernardo, in fact, Francesca, let me begin with you, because I read somewhere that this is the decade of action. And right now it is a known fact that there's around 1.1 billion jobs that we have today that we will not have in the next 10 years because of the fact that these jobs will be displaced by technology. So in addressing the skills revolution and the reskilling emergency that we are facing right now, let's define what we mean by resilience, especially resilience as it does pertain to skills. Francesca, your understanding of the word resilience.
Thank you very much, Fifi, for this question, and which in fact allows me to refer to joint work we are conducting at the European Training Foundation with the Interagency Group on Skills Anticipation and Matching, exactly on resilience. We are putting together our experiences to see how can we best learn from what has happened during the pandemic to generate, to develop a labor market and skill system which are more resilient. And when working on the paper, we exactly we ask ourselves what was the meaning of resilience in the context of labor market and skill system. And we found several definitions with words that refer to recover, adapt, rebound from adversity. The 2020 European Commission Strategic Foresight Report defines resilience as the ability not only to withdraw and cope with challenge, but also to undergo transitions in a sustainable, fair, and democratic manner. And ultimately, what we have used as a definition in the interagency group paper is resilience as the capacity to rebuild better, more robust, and inclusive labor markets. In other words, resilience is really understood as the ability to bounce back stronger and to grow from adversity. And as you can see, this narrative really takes a sort of multidisciplinary approach, a 360 degrees approach, and it sets the basis for a long-term strategic objective as part of an agenda that look into the future while learning from the past and from the present. But then we ask ourselves, what have we seen in the past and in the present? And I here want to pass two main messages. The first is about crisis, and the second one is about uncertainty. So first one, crisis. The COVID-19 first, but then also the aggression of Russia to Ukraine. And nowadays, the energy and the food crisis have shown us that new crises are likely to emerge. They are of an unforeseeable nature. And there is also a combination of a climate degradation and societies with increasing inequalities, deep economic interconnection that make the world in which we live much more vulnerable than in the past. Crises are permanent. We are in the era of the perma-crisis as they have been defined. And in these circumstances, ensuring the resilience of societies is crucial. But we don't have resilient societies if we don't have resilient individuals, citizens. And citizens can become resilient if they are also supported by institutions and by policies. And the second message I want to pass is about uncertainty. You know, when we talk with the stakeholders in the countries where we work, they all tell us that the future for them and for their country is uncertain. And it's about its uncertainty for individuals, for companies, and for institutions themselves. For individuals, is about navigating from one job to another, for young people to enter the labor market, to remain relevant in the labor market. For the companies, is actually to navigate through the transition, revising their value proposition, also developing new business models that are able to grant their survival in an economic context which is dramatically changed compared to the past. And for institutions, the challenge is really to ensure equitable policies that can prepare people and countries to absorb shocks that nobody can really foresee today. And this implies that if a crisis hits, the infrastructure is there and the country can activate this infrastructure quickly. So you can see that in this context, skills development and lifelong learning play a fundamental role now more than ever before, because skills are really essential to ensure that individuals and societies are able to navigate into these changing context, changing labor market. And ultimately, they really serve as the best buffer in uncertain times. So you asked me in the beginning about a definition, and I want to close with that. It's actually, resilience is really showing an opportunity to bounce forward. I talked before about bounce back. It's actually bounce forward toward a better future, toward a better system, which is a better system from economic, from a social, and from an environmental point of view. I would like to say it's not much to think out of the box. It's really rather about reshaping a new box.
All right, reshaping a new box and bouncing forward into it. Nice one. Antonio, your understanding of resilience, and perhaps the question is its application, because at a high level, we know that it's about being able to be dynamic and to innovate and to be able to resist against economic headwinds, be it in the form of a pandemic, be it in the form of a weather challenge, be it in the form of a revolution that's coming and that's been driven by digital change. But how do you see a skills resilience, and how do you see the framework that we should follow, either at a policy level, we should follow to implement resilience according to your understanding of what it is?
Thanks, Fifi. Thanks. And this is a very important conversation. I will draw on some of the work that actually I had the chance to do with UNIDO for the last Industrial Development Report, where we've been actually trying to address some of these questions, also working with governments across the Global South, and in general, try to understand this link that Francesca has already nicely spelled out, which is the link between resilience and all sorts of extreme events, crisis. And what I would like to start from is to stress the fact that many of these crises are unexpected, but we at the same time know that are becoming more frequent, and to a certain extent, we know that all the time they emerge, they create new demands, they create new form of pressure on institutions, organizations, labor markets, and so on. And so the question is, how do we actually look at this problem, not simply from one crisis after the other, but actually at the systemic level, how we think about how to enhance the resilience, the structural resilience of societies, economies, institutions, knowing that when these things hit, we don't know when they hit, but they know when they're going to hit, and often hit together, they create a very compressed policy setting, right? Where policymakers need to deal with, at the same time, with multiple demands, and new demands that often are unexpected. And this, of course, poses new trade-off. In some cases, this trade-off can be managed effectively. In some others are actually showing and hitting on those countries which have further vulnerabilities. So we know that things like COVID are hitting, as much as the climate change, are having disproportionate impact across countries, society, social groups. So we need to be aware of the fact that solution will not come from siloed approach on individual problems or crises, but actually how to turn this trade-off in opportunities for making the systemic level the societies and economies more resilient. And so let me start giving some concrete example that maybe can actually help us in this space. First of all, we have seen that there has been a very diverse response to the COVID crisis. And this heterogeneity, partially from the studies we've been conducting, comes from the fact that you need very different type of capabilities to address, if you want, the early stages of a crisis, the so-called robustness to shock, vis-a-vis the readiness to change that is required to actually rebuild. And these different skills and capabilities are, in fact, highly distributed across different actors. So I would say, we need to embrace an idea of resilience as something that is systemic and is distributed. Distributed means that no organization, either the private sector or the public sector, can face any of these crises alone. There is a problem of how to coordinate the effort among these different players. And we have seen that countries who have been in very specific areas, we have seen success and failures in all countries in the responses to the pandemic. But those who have been able to be successful in specific areas are those who are able to actually make this connection between public and private sector capabilities in a more effective way. So let me give you an example. Brazil had a massive hit in terms of the management of the pandemics. But at the same time, when we look at their capacity to scale up manufacturing capabilities in the context of vaccine manufacturing, we see a very successful story. So a story where the existence of capabilities across foundations like Fiocruz and other foundations that were very much linked to this public-private relationship between the procurement of drugs, the production of drugs, the innovation for new vaccine, and on top of that, the government interventions at all levels of governance with industrial policy have made that country capable to double their vaccine manufacturing capabilities and to prepare for the next potential crisis, having more flexible manufacturing capabilities to use basically different technologies, vector type or mRNA type of technologies. So this is just an example which also point to the fact that among these capabilities, industrial capabilities are very important. We have shown in the report with econometric evidence that in fact, countries which have been more resilient are also those that had more distributed industrial capabilities. Because of course, industrial capabilities are instrumental if we think about the health industry complex to manufacture those type of things that we need at speed in the moment of crisis. As much as now we are seeing in the climate change situation, countries who are able to be part, not just as consumer, but as producer and innovators in the context of renewable technologies, adaptation of technologies, and so on, are also those that are far ahead in that building of resilience. We have also learned that resilience is about redundancies. We have been for many years emphasizing efficiency and streamlining of value chains and so on, but we are realizing that sometimes having redundancies in some or part of these infrastructures and value chains and firms, it's also important to be able to scale up responses at the moment of crisis. And so in a sense, we need to think about how do we, as a society, create this insurance policy by creating redundancies in skill institutions, in companies, in public sector facilities. Let me conclude with some more specific reflection on redundancies also in the context of skills. Now, when we think about skills, we talk a lot about individual skills. We talk a lot about how, especially young people, women can be more involved in training and the development of STEMs, in particular, specific type of science, technology, maths related skills. But in many cases, especially in low middle income countries, we need to work on the way in which these vocational training institutions are able to deliver quality training, but also we need to work on more collective type of skills. Ultimately, we have lots of talented, skilled people across the global south, but their capacity to contribute to resilience, to productivity, to innovation depends on the extent to which also there are companies, organizations, both in the public and private sector, who are able to employ their skills in an effective way. So my message here is we need to really reflect on how we think about resilience in a systemic way, but also how we think about how to train not just people, but also to train organizations, develop more agile, more robust organizations that are able to actually deploy skill effectively. And this is the big challenge in many low middle income countries. We need to think carefully about not just the supply of skills, but also the quality of the demand for skills. What kind of firms, are these firms able to deploy skills, new technologies in an effective way? Are they able to valorize that relationship with the vocational training institution? And only by working at this interface, we can really start seeing a change happening. And there are good demonstration pockets of efficiency across the global south we can build on exactly at this interface between firms, organizational capabilities development, and on the other end, vocational training institution. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Right. All right. No, thank you. Just that point, the emphasis on not only the supply of the skills, but also the quality thereof. And it's wonderful to see the response coming in from the chat. on their different perspectives of resilience being perseverance and the ability to forge ahead irrespective of life's changes, according to Peter Shikuku. Niels Schultz talking about the fact that responsibility is key for resilience in the sense of understanding the challenge and ability to react and learn from it. And we also had a really nice contribution from Khadija Abdi, who did say resilience is the ability to withstand any difficulties and bounce back solutions. Kirsten, your opening remark, though, on resilience, and particularly when we talk about resilience in fragile settings in which individuals are experiencing war in their country or some form of displacement, settings in which you have a large grouping of people who are marginalized or excluded from the ability to fully adapt and be agile, as it were. Your take on resilience and the importance of resilience being inclusive.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Fifi. And I want to zoom in on the question of digital labor platforms as a means where people can integrate the economy and have low entry barriers, but where we also see obstacles and where we can somewhat see the future of work under a magnifying glass, and where we can get a glimpse of what the future of work is likely to look like also in other areas of the economy. So on these platforms, short-term jobs, so-called gigs, are mediated online. The work is either also done online, so that can be web design or labeling of pictures or other types of tasks, or the services are delivered in a specific location, so think Uber and the like. There are a number of estimates out there. Very conservative estimates think that at least 70 million people worldwide already earn part or their entire income in this so-called gig economy, of which at least 40 million people are in the low and middle income countries. So it's a truly global phenomenon that we see here, and the numbers are growing rapidly. And as I said, these digital labor platforms can play an important role in job creation in different environments. They provide flexibility and lower entry barriers with regards to the job market, and they allow disadvantaged groups like migrants, women, refugees, and others to enter the labor market. At the same time, the working conditions of gig workers do often not fulfill the standards of decent work. So the gig economy is not just a sector, but rather a phenomenon that gives us a better idea of the future of work and presents new dynamics on the labor market. And it's interesting to zoom in and to see what resilience means in this context, as we see that there are certain trends here that are likely to affect other types of work as well in the future. So against this background, it's interesting to look at this closer. What does resilience mean for workers in this gig economy on these digital labor platforms? So for them, resilience really is key because the gig economy is in a constant state of flux, and therefore workers need to grow resilience to succeed. And when they are resilient, they are able to enter and move into the gig economy and use the fact that entry barriers are low. They're also able to perform in the gig economy and move out of the gig economy when needed by leveraging their skill sets in a way that opens up opportunities for them while also coping with the many challenges that exist. So skills are really the currency in the gig economy. It is the skills of the workers that are offered as service via those platforms. It is therefore important to support the workers with frameworks that enhance their capability as well as their bargaining power on these platforms. So resilience, first and foremost, for these workers means the ability to adapt to change. A gig worker needs to constantly adapt to change and upskill or reskill more regularly than others. They constantly have to adapt to customer demand and also conditions on these platforms that are likely to change. In our research, gig workers have reported that they're interested in undertaking upskilling programs. However, most require guidance and trainings that have relevance for their specific labor market. This is why at GIZ, on behalf of our Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, we are working on developing such guidance and trainings for acquiring specific skills that are in demand. Resilience in the gig economy also means the ability to transfer and combine skills. So gig workers either delivering services on location or via the cloud require adequate soft skills and other complementary skills, not only for good customer relations and interactions, but also for managing the platform, managing the fact that most of them are contractors, managing the algorithms that guide their work. So such skills are desirable because they're value adding to the skills, the technical skills the workers have, and because they're transferable. At GIZ, we're developing and piloting soft skills trainings and other complementary trainings on digital skills, financial management, negotiation, etc., that can help these workers better navigate the gig economy. And in doing so, we are collaborating with the private sector and the public sector. Resilience also means skills anticipation, because we see very rapid changes in the gig economy on the skills that are actually in demand. And it is important for workers as well as for companies and policymakers to get a better idea of what the skills in demand are. And one example is that at GIZ, we're working on a skill compass for online work to allow workers to find out which skills it makes most sense for them to acquire next, and to inform companies and policymakers about which skills are in demand and where trainings need to be offered. And fourth and last, on digital labor platforms, resilience also means leveraging networks, because gig work often offers few opportunities to interact with others. Workers need to exploit existing opportunities and be offered additional ones, much more than in the classical workplace. And especially women, migrants, and refugees and other more vulnerable workers need support systems that can facilitate their participation in the platform economy, as well as offer useful advice on coping mechanisms. And this is why at GIZ, we are working on developing mentoring groups and networking opportunities for gig workers, for example, in Kenya, with a specific focus on women and refugees. So we see, as I said, we see the need for networks, we see the need to anticipate skills, we see the need for complementary skills, and we see the need to constantly adapt to change, for workers to be resilient and be able to adapt and bounce forward, as Francesca said, in the gig economy, be able to succeed and also be able to move out when it's better for their income and their earnings.
Mm-hmm. I think that's some fascinating research you've drawn on, just looking at the labor market right now, that is said to be the labor market of the future and is growing in prominence all over the world, the gig economy. So just understanding resilience through what has happened to these workers who continually have to adapt, given the changes that do follow in the economy. But in this adaptation and bouncing forward, I'm just wondering, to an extent, who foots the bill of, constantly anticipating these skills that will be required and getting these skills that will be in demand. Perhaps something that the panel can comment on as we continue the discussion. But Ulrika, your take on resilience as is seen through the work that CEDA does. Ma'am, I believe you are on mute.
Sorry, I'll start again. Thank you very much. What I was saying is that today, when we have the ongoing conflicts, we have the war in Ukraine, as you mentioned, and we are in the post-COVID situation. It's so important. I mean, it's always been important to build resilience, both in organizations and in systems, but also in the individuals. And this is strongly something that CEDA believes in, and this is also why we support the LKDF, since the CEDA vision puts the person, the individual, in the center for everything. And we also, in the LKDF facility framework, we work with a market system approach, and by doing that, you build opportunities and support financing initiatives that by working with the systematic approach, you identify key actors, both public and private, and get possibility to build strength and endurance in the system, but also, which is important, I've heard it from the last panel and from our panel also, with both the private and the public system, so you can tap into resources both intellectually but also financial, so you can build a better sustainable platform for skills development. So you get both financial and intellectual, and you get academic and what you have into the equation. So you set and you also set it in the local context. So you get the possibilities to strengthen resilience and adaptation in the local context, which is really important. And then also with working with LKDF as a tool, you also take all the experience and build that and take that to the platform, and so you don't work. I think it was Antonio that said we should not work in silos, and this is the fine thing about working in this way, because we have the separate ongoing PPDPs in different countries, but you take it up to a systematic level and look into them together and see where it works. And that is so important. And also what is important for us, as I said, putting the individual, as for SIDA as a financer, putting the individual in the center is also, as Kirsten mentioned here, with the gig economy and what we have in the world with refugees and everything and vulnerable groups, also to address them. And by using the MSD approach and working systematically in the local context, you can address those issues too. And you can actually get these people, the people working in the informal sector, and so into the formal sector. So working with all, and I think here private sector is a key to this. So working locally with local companies, but also with international companies, for instance, working in the countries where we are, is so important. And this is one way to do it, with the PPDPs and with the market system development approach. Thank you. I can go on. I can go further.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. We'll get you to go on a little later when we come back to the second round of questions. So it's really interesting as we talk about the importance, so that as you've highlighted the importance of public private partnerships. I think it's one of the areas in which some of the opening commentators did emphasize as well a little earlier. And Bernardo, I know that there's a lot of work that UNIDO does in this space in also trying to build resilience, not only at a workers level, but also just looking at what can be done at a management leadership level. But just your take on resilience and how UNIDO in itself is looking to play its part in increasing the level of resilience of the workforce.
Thank you so much. I was wondering what can I add. So much has been said, but at the core of why we're talking about resilience, I think that we agree that there is disruption. I think a key element is disruption, because when I heard the idea of bouncing forward, I like it, but behind that we need to think that resilience has to do with reinventing yourself, reinventing your organization, reinventing in coming back, but in a new way. And therefore, I think a key element that we should take into account is innovation and moving forward. But yes, I agree that we have been in a turmoil already, in an accelerated change that did not come with COVID, that did not come with climate change. It came with all other elements of technological transformation, digital transformation, and looking into the future, the imperative of the digital, the twin transformation on green and digital. So these are very important reasons why we're looking into the need to be prepared to the unexpected. But this is not enough. Emergency preparedness is not enough. You need to be able to to reinvent and come back later and prioritize immediately this new situation and the long-term resilience. And definitely skills are at the core of what is an important tool. I believe standards are another important tool. We think in UNIDO, we have a definition, I may read it, the ability to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to uncertainty, change, and sudden disruptions in order to survive and prosper and ultimately achieve inclusive and sustainable development. But I would like to add to that what I see in the standard precisely, in the ISO standard 22316, which is a standard on resilience. And the standards is on resilience and security. And it adds to the elements I have already put forward, something very, very important, good governance and management. Also the idea that skills is not neutral. We need a diversity of skills. Yeah, we need to distinguish between certain skills. Leadership is fundamental, knowledge and experience. Yeah, and this is important to this notion of that Antonio used, that we have to deal with redundancy, but we have also to value experience. And last but not least, certainly there is a need to have a multidisciplinary approach, and ultimately it is about all managing risk. It is about risk, but the management of risk is the defensive part. We need to be proactive. And in UNIDO, being the custodian of SDG 9, we focus definitely on resilience building, and we focus on the organizational part. Yes, individuals, we are working through precisely skills development, but it is about organizational resilience. We are talking, and Antonio addressed the issue of country resilience. He mentioned how many countries that had already adopted and absorbed technologies were in a better position to bounce back. So we have another element that UNIDO is doing, and we do a lot through our TVT programs to the institutions and strengthening the institutions, but also we work very closely with the private sector. Yeah, and this is an important element again that I would like to bring in. Kirsten talked about the networks. Yes, we need to have better networks, but we need to have them in a certain governance. Another element that in UNIDO we look very much in relation to resilience and skills is the capabilities of SMEs, of small and medium-sized enterprises, because they are the ones that are less equipped to deal with risk. Yeah, and here what we do is we know that SMEs are exposed to higher risk, so we need to prepare them, but we need also to help them to recover in the aftermath. Finally, I have mentioned the need of management and leadership and the distinction of the different levels of skills. And certainly before in the opening session, I heard that was a lot of the different skills required to deal with crisis and with the unknowns. Finally, to mention digitalization is also not straightforward. Digitalization is a panacea, but you need also even a basic foundational absorption capacity to absorb digital technologies, to absorb digital skills. If you don't have basic STEM knowledge, you will not be able to have more digital knowledge. And finally, I think Antonio elaborated it very nicely. We have in the flagship UNIDO Industrial Development Report explored and explained how digitally enabled enterprises were better in terms of sales, profits, and also limiting the job losses. So these technologies can help to accomplish some resilience, the SDGs, ISID, but in order to be there, you need foundational skills. Let me leave it at that now. Thank you.
Yes, and I just add that you also need access. You may have some of these foundational skills, but you just, as a small business, even in particular, you need access to some of these technologies that will help you be cutting edge and stay ahead and keep the number of people in your employ and keep continually improving their skill set, which we know is also a challenge for SMEs. And it's very interesting, or I'm looking forward to seeing how the world deals with this challenge as we do go forward. Luca, Francesca, I know that you guys have done some research just in the space, just looking at resilience and skills from a holistic point of view, looking at some of the policy, the ingredients there that needs to come into play when trying to craft a framework for this. I'm hoping that you can just share some of the preliminary findings of that research with us. Luca, just beginning with you, as we haven't yet heard from you.
Yeah, thank you, Fifi. So indeed, we have been collecting some evidence and reflecting quite a bit on the policy sort of reactions that countries have deployed during the COVID-19 as the latest example of a crisis where, of course, resilience has emerged as fundamental. And so, of course, as all of you already know, the evidence is still incoming. So we are not yet at the final stage of our data collection, but so there are a couple of lessons that perhaps are already quite well established that we can share. So the first one is that, of course, skills have sort of represented a fundamental dimension in explaining the labor market reaction during the COVID-19 crisis in multiple senses. So the first one is that the impact of the shock has been asymmetric depending on skill capabilities and educational attainment. So, of course, the low-skilled have suffered more than the high-skilled on average across countries, and this is true across developed and developing countries. Part of this is linked to to the nature of the shock. So some sectors have suffered more than others, but the part of it is about the skill endowments of people themselves, the capabilities of workers. And here I cannot but circle back to some of the broader categories that have been mentioned, of skills that have been mentioned already by the other speakers. Notwithstanding, I think the great point that Bernardo just made about diversity of skills. Of course, we are drawing general lines here. I mean, heterogeneity is still always in the background, and we shouldn't forget about that. But so one of these general lines is indeed that digital skills have been absolutely fundamental in the moment of the crisis, which doesn't invalidate the point that there needs to be some fundamental capabilities ahead of developing digital skills, right? I mean, that was another of Bernardo points that is very well taken. But so digital skills, of course, fundamental. We have seen in it for the emergence of remote work. We have seen it for sort of the intensity with which firms have switched to e-commerce. We have seen it for the building of further skills and training, which switched massively online in the peak of the crisis. So that's the first line I would want to point out to. The second one is about soft skills, of course, and adaptability. I really appreciated Antonio's point about diversifying skills for robustness to shocks and skills for readiness to change further down the line. I wonder where soft skills would be put by him in this diversification. Feels as if they are fundamental in both phases. At least that's how I think we think about it in the group. But and then the third point about is about the fact that during the crisis, sort of the propensity of people to train, and in particular the propensity of firms to offer training, went down quite a bit. Now, so we have only very descriptive evidence here, and mostly from European labor force surveys, but we can say that essentially the participation to training went back among workers, among the employed, went back to a level that we had seen around 2012 on average across different European countries. So effectively a bounce back of about 10 years. Now, this could all be very temporary, And there are several explanations, of course. Part of it is social distances, part of it is, the firm foreclosures, so mandated foreclosures. But part of it is actually the fact, even in sectors that kept on operating, this sort of propensity to offer training went down. And we explain it, for instance, in the fact that there was a lot of uncertainty about the future. So firms were not necessarily able to understand where to invest or whether to invest. And the fact that sort of other investment may have taken priority, say, for instance, in implementing a digital infrastructure in the firm itself. Right. So with a view to this sort of three broad points, I think policy reacted pretty promptly in several ways. I mean, I don't have the time to sort of describe all of these, but perhaps one, and perhaps the most innovative way, was the development of rapid reskilling programs. That meant effectively what we usually targeted to essential employers. That meant effectively the possibility to retrain very fast the unemployed, first of all, but also those who became unemployed because of the COVID-19 crisis, so that they could sort of find jobs in essential services. How did that sort of deploy itself? Well, it was several different aspects. I mean, first of all, countries developed the ability, some services, to assess the skill needs in a faster way than they usually do. This was often carried out by the public employment services that invested quite a bit on online capabilities. So a second common feature was the fast tracking approval of new curricula, often online training curricula, that enabled the fast reskilling to happen in the very first place, including via different teaching methods. And sometimes for those countries who had the sort of financial resources, the deployment of specific training directly sort of provided by governments, in particular for hard-hit sectors. And that's, I think, those are the main points that emerge from the immediate response.
The immediate response. Francesca, your key takeaways here, and perhaps maybe speaking more to the more longer term responses as proposed by the research in coming from an event like the pandemic and building better resilience for future uncertainties?
Yes, thank you very much. Very often we are asked about the priorities. So should we, when we talk to governments, should we put in place quick wins because job seekers are knocking at our door, or should we rather focus on the long-term strategies and policy actions? And the answer there is that there is no rule for priority. Both are very much needed. And of course, we see that we work also under constant pressure. There is a sense of urgency dictated by different events, but I think that the current political situation, geopolitical situation, should not hamper the long-term change in the country. The two really have to go hand in hand. And we spoke before about resilient labor markets and resilient systems and resilient people, but to prepare these resilient systems and people, countries really need to build an anticipatory culture. And when it comes to skills, what we see across country is that there is a need to work on skills intelligence, skills anticipation, to allow individuals and country to grasp the opportunities offered by the changing context, the changing labor markets. Opportunities exist, are out there, but people need to need to really understand where these opportunities emerge. We know all very well that education and employment have different timing. The labor market needs something today. Education system need much longer time to prepare young people or people in general to be ready to respond to those needs. And anticipation can partially fill that gap. Skills intelligence is one of the key pillars of the EU New Skills Agenda, and tools to anticipate skills needs such as the setup of skills panorama or other tools implemented by member states are key to anticipate skills needs. And I can tell you that also beyond the borders of the European Union, in the countries where we work, there is also very high attention on anticipation system. And for instance, foresight methodologies are used to scan the different drivers of change, to anticipate emerging technology and see the impact that this technology can have on new skills needs, or also to anticipate developments and prepare for the new opportunities earlier and more effectively. And a number of tools are used, traditional data, traditional sources of data, and also more innovative sources such as big data. Big data are widely used across countries now through the analysis of online job vacancies, for instance, but also other types of big data, such as the one coming from the web. Social media have been widely used, or also, international registries such as patents, international publication through the use of text mining techniques. So within this context, in a vision of longer term measure, I think that there are two key dimensions that have to be assessed. On the one side, the foundation and the soft skills. On the other side, the initial education and also the upskilling and reskilling pathways. So we talked before about the perma crisis, the permanent crisis that we are all facing. And when we talk about systems that face crisis, we also need to prepare people who are flexible enough to navigate through these different crises, that are flexible enough to go from one job to another. And in this respect, key competencies are key. And we have seen it through the pandemic very clearly. Individuals had to build solid foundation skills. Those who had solid foundational skills were the ones who could navigate the crisis much better. At the same time, it was also clear that the soft skills played a key role. Adaptability, flexibility, learning to learn. These were really key aspects that helped the people navigating through the crisis. And also we saw, and I think it's important, especially in the framework of this UNIDO event, we saw the key importance of entrepreneurial skills. For instance, as in the case of the many workers or employers who had to transform their businesses and their models, or even to create new products to navigate through the crisis. And be aware that the employer were totally agreeing with this. We carried out last year a survey with UNIDO to see how employers saw the crisis, and they saw skills as the major factor for resilience and change management. And they mentioned digital skills, e-marketing, but also creativity, design thinking as the skills that could allow them to really grow through the crisis. But on the other side, the pandemic also showed that there are new emerging opportunities in different economic sectors, and people have to be prepared for these different opportunities. We carried out in ETF a number of studies on new emerging skills needs in different sectors. For instance, in issues related to greening, and we saw that the green transition is bringing new emerging green occupation, but also transforming overall all the jobs. So jobs will become overall greener, and then you need to train and to prepare your people accordingly. This highlights, of course, the need to have a permanent monitoring system in place that enables countries and individuals to really adapt constantly their curricula and make initial education more relevant to the needs of the labor market. At the same time, and I conclude here, these information are really essential for the current workers. If all jobs are changing, it means that also the workers of today have to adapt their skills. And what we have seen in the studies is that change, as I said before, will happen across all occupations. There will be broader profiles needed. We talk about broader craft people. I'm not only referring to high-tech jobs. And we also saw that the interaction between different disciplines becomes the rule. And in this context, there is a very strong implication for upskilling and reskilling of all workers, regardless of their skills level. And I really believe that these upskilling and reskilling, if I can say so, a more democratic upskilling and reskilling for all will be the real challenge that all the countries, transition country, developing countries, but even developed economies will have to face in the future.
Yeah, just on a practical example on what you have said, particularly regarding upskilling and reskilling, there is a individual I know who's currently a radiographer, one of these really in-demand critical jobs. But nonetheless, this individual is studying coding. One of the disciplines that we are told is going to be a discipline that's relevant today and will be relevant again in future. And he, unfortunately, is unable to take leave, study leave, from his current place of work because his employer is of the opinion that coding is not a discipline aligned to his existing job. Just putting out there some of the difficulties that certain individuals could face in trying to upskill or reskill themselves from an employment point of view. And another takeaway from your example of some of the long and short term solutions that you highlighted, as you said that the research showed that there wasn't necessarily a priority, a specific priority, everything was a priority. In terms of how the entrepreneurs reacted to the COVID-19 crisis, I know another entrepreneur whose business was the school's business. And of course, we do know that education also was disrupted significantly. Learners couldn't go to school, had to stay home, everything went online, and it impacted his business. And he temporarily went into the manufacture of sanitizers at the time when sanitizers and masks and all of that was a thing. And it was interesting to see that that temporary shift did help him put bread on the table for that short moment of time. And now what he has actually done is he's reverted back to the mainstay education business, given that things have gone back to normal, as it were. So just adding a bit of color into some of the research by practical examples of individuals. But as we do move on with the conversation, just noting the fact that we are running out of time, there is a question that has come from the audience, which I'm hoping that we can take right now. And Ulrika, I think the question is perhaps directed to you directly, or maybe this is something that you can weigh in on. It's just in terms of the relevance, how relevant do you think the overview and opportunity for people in more challenging contexts with high informality and low access to digital technology is? So I think it's speaking to what resilience looks like right now for the people who are marginalized and how that situation can be better ameliorated. What's your take?
Thank you very much. And this is a tricky question, but still, this is something that we work on. I can mention, because when we look into the digitalization, for instance, SIDA is having a program where we work with the regulators in Africa. This is and working with our setup, how we developed the framework for digitalization in Sweden, and doing a replication in other countries in their local contexts. And this is so important, and this has actually been taken up by the EU. So they will take this system and go wider and broader and put in 10 or 100 times money for this, because it's so important to get the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure down, because as we know, and we saw this in the COVID also, during the COVID pandemic, that some countries were able to adapt, and they were able to adapt maybe in the major cities, but out in the countryside it was more troublesome. And you have refugees, and you have marginalized people and groups in the society that don't have access. So that is really something that SIDA is working with, and I know globally we are doing it together with other partners, of course. But that is one thing, getting people the access and the ability and the possibility to use the tools that are there, and get the information about what is there for them. So that is one way of working with this. And then we have we support, for instance, with the World Bank together to work in refugee camps to get people that are, for instance, refugees from Syria that are in the Middle East, in different countries. But this has also been duplicated now to Africa, where we have permanent migration streams, and you have refugees that are not longer refugees because they are staying in the countries, and to get them into work and skill them to get them to be skilled workers and find opportunities for them also is so important. And this is something that we are looking into. It's so important. But on that, there you also have the nexus. I mean, you have the humanitarian side and you have the development side to get that together, because we see that it's more and more permanent. Conflict is causing more and more permanent establishment of refugees in different countries. So that was not the full answer, but a bit of the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely. And to the point, and to emphasize the importance of that access, because it's argued that in areas whereby you have some form of economic disruption, like a war, the importance of online teaching tools to ensure that teaching can continue even if students can't show up physically. But that can only happen, of course, if there is access and there's that infrastructure that you talk about to enable that. But we're bringing this conversation home right now and just getting into the second round of questions, just trying to wrap up everything that has been said so far. Quite a lot has been said around resilience and what resilience means, just within the context of the skills revolution and the change that is happening to the labor market, driven by technology, driven by the climate, driven by economic uncertainties. And therefore, I'd like to ask you, just within this context, how within your individual organizations and within your individual roles, you think we can be better prepared for the skills revolution within your individual institutions? Perhaps what can be done differently as we try to accelerate and perhaps amplify the level of response currently underway? Kirsten, perhaps you can come in here. What's happening at the GIZ in this regard for preparedness and increasing resilience around the skills revolution?
So thank you so much, Fifi. So GIZ is doing a lot of work on skills, on vocational training. But maybe, because I think there's a wish also to give some more concrete examples, let me try and zoom in again on the gig economy and on digital labor platforms, because as we said earlier, this is where we kind of see some trends going on and where we can also learn some things that are going to shape other sectors and other types of learning in the future. And we all know that a characteristic of the skills revolution is a rejection of traditional degrees and occupation requirements in favor of more like applicable practical skills. And so one project we're doing, which kind of picks up on one Francesca mentioned, in terms of skill anticipation, is to develop a skill compass, which will actually data scrape the biggest freelance websites to provide information on the real-time needs. And so this can inform those that will seek to upskill themselves and reskill themselves now with clear trajectories, as opposed to vague future and more general future trends. So they will know if I have certain skill sets, where is the highest return on investment if I acquire the next skills. based on the current demands, but also based on the skills they already have. So if they already know a certain programming language, what other coding language will be useful for them based on the demand and based on what they already know and have. And it will also allow policy to be more evidence-based, because we will see clearly there what the trends are, and will be more able to anticipate those trends, and then develop trainings that accompany these, and also in support with the companies, because as also Ulrika mentioned and others mentioned, it's really important we involve the private sector here. Another thing that at GIZ we're working on is the topic of micro-credentials as kind of an alternate pathway to acquire new or recognize existing competencies, also with the idea that the classical education usually takes a long time, and with micro-credentials people can acquire and certify skills, very practical short-term needs in a quicker and more flexible way, in addition and in complement to existing and traditional education systems. And so we are zooming in to better understand what those micro-credentials can actually offer to gig workers and how they can use them. And we also want to develop a platform for these workers to inform themselves about micro-credential. And I think here also a future idea for us will be to further involve the private sector. So to develop these things in partnerships with platforms. We're already starting discussions here. And also to think about who could be offering these micro-credentials and badges, and that could actually be also workers working on these platforms themselves. And so in addition to work on the micro-credentials and on the skill compass, as I said earlier, we think that trainings are important, and networking opportunities and mentorships. We really need to cater to the needs of workers and have very specific trainings also based on the needs we see. And that those need to be trainings in very specific technical skills, but also trainings that focus on soft skills. So the importance has already been mentioned a lot of times, because they really complement and augment technology. And that we also need to focus on the more disadvantaged workers. And there we need to complement the trainings with mentorship, with networking opportunities, because especially in these new types of work, when work is mostly done remote or as single contractors, people get more isolated and they miss those networks. And they are very important for resilience, as we said earlier. The last thing I wanted to mention, Fifi, also going to the question you asked earlier in terms of, but who's in charge of this constant reskilling? Are we giving that whole load and responsibility of loading it on the workers in some ways? So for now, we see that in terms of the gig economy, we see that some digital labor platforms offer trainings. They do so notably where the labor supply lacks the skills that they need. But we also see that because most workers are hired as independent contractors, they're also the ones who are often alone responsible for organizing and paying for their training, and to be constantly alert and continue, because they're kind of their next income will depend on this. And so we think that there's a role for regulators here, and we need to build their capacity as well to look closer and make sure that workers have all the support they need and that they're not left on their own. And we know that especially this phenomenon of digital labor platforms, there's a need also for regulation to adapt to this new phenomenon, because the classical labor laws and how responsibilities were divided previously do not necessarily apply. So this is why we're also taking this up. We're currently developing a course for policymakers on regulation of the gig economy, and we're taking the topic of skills and regulation with regards to skills up as an important topic that policymakers need to look into. Yeah.
I'd also, thanks so much, Kirsten. I'd also be interested in finding out, so perhaps there are some employers on the call with us today, and what the response to micro-credentials is like from the private sector right now, just particularly, I mean, from an African context where right now, still today, there's more emphasis that is placed on your conventional and your traditional degree or qualification. And I'm wondering how the market, the labor market, is responding to micro-credentials right now, and whether there is a premium or weight that has been placed on it. Antonio, coming from a traditional institution, a little bit, but just as we wrap up the conversation, your take on how we can do better in showing up and preparing better for the skills revolution and improving resilience.
Thanks, Fifi. Thanks. And I think this conversation has been extremely inspiring from any point of view. Let me just start from a big question. I think when we talk about digitalization, we need to understand digitalization for what, right? In what direction we want to have this transformation. This transformation, it's not neutral. And do we want to have more gig economy type of configuration, or do we want to have organizations that can use technologies to have better type of jobs and that different type of employment? So we have to ask some big questions. And also we need to understand what is, to have a sort of reality check about what is really happening, especially in the Global South. With colleagues in the Università Federale di Rio de Janeiro, the University of Johannesburg, also in collaboration with UNIDO, we've been conducting extensive surveys with hundreds and in total thousands of firms who are actually engaging with digitalization. And we are trying to understand what does really mean for them, how much they are really involved, because ultimately skills make sense and digital skills make sense if we can actually have productive organization who can use them in a productive way and create good job opportunities. And what is remarkable here is that when we look at specifically what firms are doing, both in terms of technology adoption and in terms of changing their business models, not just in the Global South, but also in the Global North, especially small medium enterprises are still at the very early stages of this revolution. So we need to also be careful in not just jumping 2 steps ahead, and we need to go through that process, which is a revolution in the making, if you want, right? We are seeing something happening in the making. And this transformation, it's what I see being particularly important here is that in many cases, the skills that we are talking about are in some cases foundational skills, but in many other cases are also new type of skills that actually reflect the nature of the new technology. Lots of the digital technologies are not new per se. I mean, we have been using 3D printing from the 90s. We have been robotizing the automotive sector, chemicals, and so on from the 60s, 70s. What is new is the fact that in many cases, these technologies are now integrated. They are fused into new technology systems that require fundamental different type of skills to be run effectively. And so if you think about what people call the green digital twin, right? If we want to run diffused energy system with renewable technology at the core, which potentially also create a fuel for green hydrogen and other technology. Now we are talking about almost new science areas, right? Our new technology areas. So how does skills training catch up with this fundamental change in the nature of the technology means rethinking, of course, the way in which the institutions define curricula, how they work with the different type of stakeholders, but also how do we finance this institution to make this happen? We need to go back to the reality of many vocational training institutions, which many particular low middle income countries have a very limited resources. These limited resources are always very much stretched between 2 different alternative goals. In many cases, they are trying to include people. They are trying to create a more pathways for young people to get some basic skills. And on the other hand, now they are asked also to create most advanced skills, right? So you are facing lots of challenges in terms of addressing these new demands, while at the same time, responding to more to traditional needs of basic skills and foundational skills. And at the same time, given that these technologies raise the capability threshold, if you want, they require more systemic, more cross-cutting, more cross-sectoral type of knowledge and understanding of the technology. We also need to think about how do we not simply work on vocational training and the financing of that new model of delivering this kind of training. Very concrete example, in many African countries, you have skills levies who are specific taxes attached to payroll of companies to finance training. Is this a model that actually delivers or doesn't deliver? Does discourage formal employment or encourage formal employment in investing in skill? How can we realign the incentive, creating various forms of grants, subsidies, industrial policy that actually align the interest of the firms and the firms who are capable to do the job of training? The second bit I would like to emphasize is that the nature of this technology is such that we need to think also how to start building up public infrastructure that support the retrofitting of companies and the absorption of these technologies. When you work across many African countries, Latin America, but also Southeast Asia, you see lots of companies needs access to lots of technologies that are, for example, data analytics or pilot lines to test new components, new solutions. And these type of things, especially for small and medium enterprises, are extremely costly. So if the government doesn't take an important role here in creating this public infrastructure that actually provide technology services, extension services, access to pilot lines, we might find it very difficult to see this technology diffusing across local economies and small and medium enterprises. And this is becoming very, very important because skills alone and putting all our emphasis just on individual skills might potentially miss these more systemic, firm level capabilities that need to be built in order to absorb skilled people in the labor market. And just finally, we have very good example of things that are happening and where companies are actually relying on this infrastructure to test, for example, I've been working many years, I'm affiliated with the University of Johannesburg. You go in the mining equipment cluster in Gauteng, and you can see that companies are trying to use new sensors for predicting maintenance to reduce waste in the mining sector, right? So you are aligning here digital, you're aligning green and reduction of material waste, and you're aligning that with skills. So I think we need to have more cases of this type where companies, public institutions, skills triangulates and find solution to the most pressing challenges that we are facing.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. So thanks everyone for the contribution so far. I hope our attendees are still with us. We had quite a lot of active engagement at the start of the program. Please do feel free to continue actively engaging with us, asking any questions, which we'll take throughout the program, as the topic is really weaved into one overall theme. And Antonio, just to get to your a point, to respond to the point that you made around the financing challenge and how that's a bit different in an African context or a developing society context. I was reading research from asset managers and where asset managers are putting capital in right now within the ESG framework. And the research was arguing that in an African context, less money is going towards financing climate, not necessarily because of the returns element or the lack of awareness of climate, but because in an African setting, societal and economic challenges were seen as a lot more pressing. So just trying to add to the point that you were making around this financing of adaptation and resilience, which I think is quite an important one. And I mean, Kirsten had said that in the gig economy, it was the individuals who were responsible for upskilling and paying for the upskilling, but how many people are in that position, particularly permanent workers whose salaries may have remained stagnant throughout this time. And I'm hoping that we can get more engagement a little bit later throughout the 2 days on the issue of financing. We want to, we see the skills revolution is coming. We've been preparing for it, but it's going to need a lot of financing. And who's there to plug the hole? Maybe you, Bernardo, maybe some of your friends in the organization. Just your take on the skills revolution and how we can better prepare for it and better become resilient, sir.
Unmute. So thank you so much, and I like the idea of the need to put an emphasis on infrastructure, which is fundamental. It is fundamental when we talk about the informal sector, as Ulrika did. Connectivity is fundamental. You cannot deploy any of the technologies without having basic infrastructure in place. We have many examples where even we had well-advanced traceability system. We tried to do it with blockchain in Ghana. It didn't work because the connectivity is just not there. And if the connectivity is not there, you cannot move forward. But if we look at the companies, the question is what type of frameworks and what type of infrastructure they need. And they need an institutional infrastructure. They need an ecosystem that will support them because companies are changing. They have to change. They have to adapt. They need to get risk management practice, but in particular, they need business continuity approaches to convert also to these digital technologies. And for that, they need to, let's use again, the change of the skills. I don't want to use neither reskilling nor upskilling, but they need a change of the skills they need. We have been working on this level, the organizational entity called company enterprise, in order to provide them with the tools. And a powerful tool to do that is through standards, because during the pandemic, we had a very good publication on MSMEs, helping them for business continuity. But in order for them to absorb them and then recovery, they need a foundation, they need also infrastructure, and then they need a management system, and this management system can help them to introduce risk management. So I reiterate this aspect of the need to have foundation at the level of the individuals so that they can absorb. You need foundation at the level of enterprises, and in order for the enterprise to benefit from this, they need to have this ecosystem. Let me just finalize by mentioning one aspect that didn't come yet, but we talked a lot about digitalization, which is cybersecurity. I think it is very important when we do the effort to digitalize either individuals, the informal sector, small companies, or companies, we need to take into account that there is a big threat. Imagine what it means for a small company to lose part of their business because something goes wrong at the digital level. So this is a very important element that we need to bring into the discussion, that is also depending on certain skills. Thank you so much.
All right, definitely. And it's really interesting. It's a really important and an economy with quite a lot of opportunity, right? So you teach people to be cyber criminals. You have to, so that they can detect criminal activity on those who are trying to infiltrate the internet and company systems, as it were, for the negative. You treat those to do it to stop those guys. It's wonderful. Fingers crossed that the good guys don't eventually want to cross the floor and become one of the not so good guys. Jokes aside, we are out of time for this panel, but I thought that just a key takeaway from each of you in a sentence, if possible, a sentence maybe to the same characters of a tweet, if possible, on what your expectations or your key takeaway of this two-day event, what you want to leave the audience with, being a message from your respective organizations. And Luca, I'm going to begin with you. Just one key takeaway you want to leave us with.
Yeah, so connecting also to the last part of our conversation, I would say resources are fundamental, but not enough. So it's not all about the money. There needs to be, as Bernardo mentioned, an ecosystem that supports both firms and individuals in understanding their opportunities, the opportunities that exist, and do it right for the future.
Right. Not all about the money. Francesca?
Well, if you ask me one key thing, I would tell skills, and skills, of course. Skills are really the best buffer to navigate through crisis and through uncertain times. We don't know what the future will be like. We have some elements to predict some part of the future, but nevertheless, the skills we equip people with are the one that will allow them to really go through these difficult or uncertain times in a smoother way.
All right. So skills, the best buffer to navigate through uncertainty. Ulrika?
I'm thinking here, so I'm going to take Luca's, it's not all about the money, into it's all about the money, because I come from the financial sector myself, so before joining SIDA. So I think, looking into the Addis agenda, we haven't talked about that, but tapping the private sector on financing is crucial, because development money cannot do this. So that is one thing, and also the system approach in addressing challenges and opportunities on the local level, but also in the global level, taking from the global, working in the local level, so to get it to the communities and the individuals on ground. That was more than a tweet, but thank you.
Okay, no, that's perfect. So I'll make it a tweet. It's not all about the money, but you can't do it without the money. I think we're safe there. Kirsten, your last words, ma'am.
So It's hard to summarize this fascinating panel, and there's going to be more discussions today, so hard to predict what's going to come. But I would say, like, if you want me to sum it up in a tweet, don't leave the workers alone. So to say that there's so much pressure on upskilling and reskilling, and I think, as Francesca said, that's key and very important, but workers cannot do that alone, and they need the resources, but they also need the regulation and the structure to divide responsibilities and to clarify and to have opportunities to do so and to know about those opportunities and be able to access them.
All right. Don't leave the workers alone. Antonio, I can see by, and Bernardo, by your hand gestures, you're really thinking about this, which means that your takeaways are going to be hot. They're going to be
very short. I think we need to move from big picture stories to build coalitions of the willing of coalitions of interest in specific contexts to start implementing feasible solutions. And these solutions are going to be incremental solutions, are not going to be revolutionary one, but will allow us to see change and demonstrate that change is possible in this area. So building coalitions.
Okay. And essentially what you're saying is less talk, more action. Bernardo, the final word to you, sir.
Yes, I am trying to summarize, and what we are discussing is that people have to be at the center of any transformation, yeah, but we need a holistic approach and take all the players into account.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll make that the last word, because essentially none of us can do it alone. No organization, no individual, no business. And yeah, it's definitely about everyone and all hands on deck doing this together. To all of you, thank you so much for your time. I mean, we've had such a wonderful feedback from the attendees who say that this discussion has been really interesting for them and very educational and very wonderful. So thank you definitely for providing insights to a lot of people into what is a very important theme and a theme that will require a whole host of action and a whole host of stakeholders on board. I mean, it's so interesting. We even have Wale coming back.
Yeah, I just tried to stick back in there to get some, to chime in a little bit. Really great closing statements by everyone there. I've learned a lot, and I think they've really helped us appreciate what's at stake here and what's possible. The messages have been great, so well done to the panel.
Can we applaud on virtual things? Let's applaud for ourselves.
Yes,
I think
if you're up there, you can just use emoji to appreciate the panelists in the chat. But I thought that was great. Awesome.
Okay. Wonderful. So, and I think that everyone, the speakers especially, but definitely the attendees, everyone needs a bit of a comfort break right now. Stretch the legs, grab your coffee, because we do have another session that is coming up. In fact, we've got lunch right now. Isn't that correct, Wale?
Yes, we are breaking for lunch. So we are gone for an hour, and we'll see you back in just about an hour. And that should take us to about, I think that will be 13:30 CEST. So yes, please do your best to join us for that. And I would be having the pleasure of engaging another great panel as we dive a little deeper into TVET, Technical Vocational Education and Training. I think that's a big part of what we're talking about in terms of building resilience. So we're going to be breaking that down in the context of the TVET practitioners, so to speak, and what's the role of government and policymakers, and what's coming next. How do you deal with challenges, because they're certainly going to come. So I look forward to that, and enjoy the break.
Yeah, see you in an hour.